Okay, guys, I preach Sundays, so I've got the lead this evening, and as I do frequently, before I dig into the material, I've got two jokes for you, okay? The first one you may have heard before, so just be patient, okay? Husband and wife had been married for 60 years. They had no secrets except for one. Woman kept in her closet a shoebox that she forbade her husband from ever opening. But when she was on her deathbed, with her blessing, he opened the box and found a crocheted doll and $95,000 in cash. You heard this one?
No.
My mother told me that the secret to a happy marriage was to never argue, she explained. Instead, I should keep quiet and crochet a doll. Her husband was touched, only one doll. And that meant she'd only been angry with him once in 60 years. But what about all the money, he asked. She said, that's the money I made from selling dolls. How many of you guys have heard that one? Just one? Not bad. One more.
My wife liked that one, I think, too much.
Oh, she'll like this one more. All right. Police officer jumped into a squad car, called the station. I have an interesting case. A woman shot her husband for stepping on the floor she just mopped.
Yes.
Have you arrested her? Said the sergeant. No, floor's still wet.
Me too. Why do they do that? I don't know, but
Is the cop the husband? Or was he called to the scene?
He's a wise man.
I don't know.
Now, which one was better, Christina? First or the second?
I thought the 95,000.
That one was better?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, but I understand the second one.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
She understands the second one. She liked the first one better. All right.
the second one's not funny.
The second one's like, it's too real.
Too true.
So here we go. Here we go. We talked about, and I used three words interchangeably on Sunday. I used perseverance, endurance, and faithfulness. And I did that on purpose, even though they're not the same. But they're all closely related. And one of the things we have been talking about in this series is first comes agape love, a very special kind of love. And if it's agape, then what is going to come next is going to be sacrifice or service. That's what agape does, is it serves the one you love. If agape comes first, then is going to come gentleness. It's going to happen. If agape love is there, then humility is going to come. Those are the two that Ben preached in the middle, on gentleness and humility. And then last week I preached, if first there is agape love, it's going to be faithful. It's going to endure. It's not going to quit, because agape doesn't quit, right? And we're going to see one verse that actually just says that literally. Agape doesn't quit, okay? It's a different kind of love. And so that was the theme, but I used faithfulness, endurance, and perseverance interchangeably. What I want to do this evening is pretty much focus more on the term perseverance, but the others are still there, okay? If you want to exchange the others in your mind, I don't think it'll hurt one thing. Now, the big thing that I did on Sunday is I asked this question: how is perseverance measured? How do you measure perseverance? Most people do it by time, quantity, right? If you persevere in a marriage, it means you don't divorce. And that's it. Persevere in something, you don't quit. You just keep on going, all right? And I made the case on Sunday that perseverance is more about how you endure than that you endure. It's more about how you continue to love rather than just not quitting the relationship. We tend to measure perseverance by, do you quit? I think God measures it by, have you quit loving? Does that make sense?
Because it's possible to quit loving and not quit a relationship.
Absolutely. In fact, I think that probably is more normal than the alternative. If relationships go on, I think people tend to quit agapeing each other. They just live together. Okay? We're going to talk about that at the very beginning of this thing. This first part's a little bit review, then I'm going to dig a little deeper into one piece of it, then we'll come back to this theme. Let's look at the next slide. I use the term quiet quitting because that's a kind of a common term right now. You see in the workplace, a lot of people quiet quit. You can find articles all over the place on it. If you just Google it and just read a little bit. Googling it, you're going to find out that quiet quitting means people go in and do just enough to keep their job, but nothing extra. They show up as late as possible. They leave as early as possible. They do as little as possible. They don't do anything extra, right? They want the paycheck, but they don't want to invest themselves any more than they have to keep a paycheck. How many of you guys have seen quiet quitters on the job? You don't have to raise your hands. How many of you guys are quiet quitters on the job? Don't have to raise your hands. And they do it for so many reasons. You know, I mentioned on Sunday that sometimes people quiet quit because they think they're undervalued, or they think that they're mistreated, or they just are bored, or they just hate their job, but they just don't have a better option to go to. There's a lot of reasons that people quiet quit, right? But it is a huge phenomenon. There are a whole lot of people in the marketplace that quiet quit. Well, I applied it to marriage. Okay, how many people quiet quit a marriage? I hadn't done what I did earlier this week, and I just, people quiet quit marriage. And there's a boatload of articles out there about people quiet quitting in their marriages. Same basic principle. Now, a little bit different. They don't show up as early, leave as early as possible, that kind of stuff. I mean, but the whole idea is they do as little as possible to keep the marriage alive, anything short of divorce. Okay? And it's normal. Really, really normal. I read one definition. It's when one partner withdraws emotionally and mentally from a relationship. You ever seen that happen? Emotions just drop, while still remaining physically present. It's a gradual process, can be difficult to recognize at first. Signs of quiet quitting: there's a reduction in communication, they don't talk as much, right? A decrease in emotional investment, a lack of participation in shared activities, they don't do as many things together. You avoid intimacy, and oftentimes there's a fantasizing about being single. Those are some of the markers that I found as I was digging around. That was in one article. Other articles reinforced those markers as I was getting around in that kind of a thing. I found one article on Psychology Today, which is, I kind of dug into it for a little bit, and this is what they said. And I made this point too on Sunday. I didn't steal it from that. I found this today as I was playing. It says, the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. Okay? The opposite of agape is not hate. The opposite of agape is apathy. I don't care anymore. Right? Doesn't matter to me anymore. That's quiet quitting. That's a big piece of quiet quitting. It says, so paradoxically, you might find yourself arguing and disagreeing less than you used to, because conflict takes energy. You just don't care, right? Conflict takes energy, and you don't feel the relationship is worth the investment of time or energy. So you may not argue as much because you've quit, right? Why argue? You've quit. You take care of your own needs, figure the spouse can look after themselves. Or if your partner is doing the quiet quitting, you notice they're no longer doing the little things for you that they once did, and they've lost interest in spirited discussions or hashing out differences. And if you want to really get teary-eyed about this, which I don't do often, you just go back and listen to the song, You Don't Bring Me Flowers Anymore, by Barbra Streisand and Neil Diamond. And I didn't know that except I looked it up today.
I was going to say, you've never gone back and listened to that song.
No. I wouldn't have known that.
This is a big moment. He actually had a song quote in his sermon Sunday. Did you guys catch it? I can't remember right now what it was. But did you know that? I don't remember. You had some line in your sermon that was like the title of a song.
I think I did, but yeah. I forget what it was.
And when I heard it, I'd read it previously, but then when I heard it and she like nudged me, and I go, he's never heard that song. He doesn't know anything about it. And then tonight you've got this music listed here.
I do my research, but I know that song.
Yeah. One of the websites you read today mentioned that song.
Yeah, it did. It did. Now, I asked the question. I didn't phrase it in these terms on Sunday, but this is serious. Okay? Is quiet quitting unfaithfulness? Okay? We think of unfaithfulness as cheating physically. Is quiet quitting unfaithfulness? Where you live together under the same roof, but don't serve each other, not humble with each other, don't sacrifice for each other. It's all about you at this point. You are commanded by God to agape love. You are not commanded by God to eros. You are commanded to agape. Can't command eros. Feelings are hard to command. Agape can be commanded. And so if you refuse to love the way that God has told you, are you unfaithful to your wife and unfaithful to your God? Unfaithful to your husband and unfaithful to your God? Is it equivalent in God's eyes to adultery? That's the question. A lot of people quiet quit rather than divorce because they don't want to commit adultery. They don't want to be judged by God. I think they're already there. Does that make sense? Is that too harsh? If you're commanded by God to agape and you quit agapeing, you are not persevering the way God tells you to. You're not being faithful in your marriage. Because it's not just about not quitting time. It's about how you don't quit. Right? It's what you do in that time. Faithfulness is not just measured by time, it's measured by character. By Christ-likeness. Right? That was the big point I tried to make on Sunday. Now, I didn't make this point. But I think this follows. I think quiet quitting is a form of unfaithfulness. And in God's eyes, I suspect it's equivalent to adultery. What do you think, Ben? Have I gone too far?
Well, I want to be real careful here because I don't want to call you Jesus. But this line of thinking seems to fit really well with the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, you've heard it said, you're not supposed to murder, but do you have any anger? He takes the big idea that we think, if I don't do that, I'm fine, and he brings it more internally that says that if you're doing this, you've already sinned, right? And then he does the other one with lust. You think that you can't commit adultery, but I'm telling you, if you've even lusted, then you've committed a sin. You're already there in your heart. I wonder if this is the same exact concept. If Jesus were sitting here, if he would say the same thing. You've heard it said you're not supposed to get a divorce. But if you've already quit on your spouse but haven't divorced, you've already sinned. You're already in that spot, on that space. I think that works and holds, but it's dangerous because then, we're making ourselves look pretty important.
But it's a scary thought, isn't it? Because quiet quitting's easy.
Toby's got a question.
I'm always afraid of her questions. Don't give her a mic.
It's not really a question. There's an excellent movie with this same principle. It's called Fireproof with Kirk Cameron. And the couple had drifted, and he went through some exercises given to him by a pastor to start showing love for his wife, even though he didn't feel it anymore. And it's really a good movie. It's
Same basic thesis.
biblical principles.
Well, there was a resource that came out of that's almost like a devotional called the Love Dare. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's the same kind of a thing. It's you're supposed to do it without even letting your spouse know that you're doing this. But it's a devotional resource that basically tells you today do this, and it kind of walks you through and encourages you and builds you up. And essentially, what it promises that if you do these things, you'll find that the emotion starts following it eventually. The obedience to what is right eventually will lead to the feeling of wanting to do what's right.
It takes me back to the first sermon I preached in this series several weeks ago when I talked about the Bible tells the older women to teach the younger women how to love. Now that's weird because older women do not have to teach younger women eros. People are pretty good at eros without any instruction, right? What they're not good at is this kind of love, agape love. This one takes work. This one takes instruction, it takes vision, right? And so when it says older women teach the younger ones how to love, this is the kind of stuff you're talking about. You can teach agape. You can choose agape when you don't feel it at all. And if you don't choose agape when you don't feel it, you're being unfaithful. You're disobeying God and you're dishonoring your spouse. Is that by it? I know that's strong, but I think that's it. Any other comments, questions on that? Pushback? All right, well, let's go. Let's go on to the next slide. I also mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but I wanted to bring it back as we're talking about this discussion, because this is huge. We use the term love too monolithically. Is that a good word? There's too many things that it can mean, right? It's one of these words that have all kinds of meaning that we've compressed into one. One of the things that the Greeks did well is that they separated different kinds of love. They gave them different terms. You've ever heard, we call it snow. I guess people who live in, Eskimos, they have a bunch of different words. They'd have a different word for this than the stuff that fell a couple weeks ago, right? Because they distinguish between different kinds of snow. That's what the Greeks did with love, all right? The term eros is the one that comes into English as erotica, erotic. If you think erotic, you think sexual, right? It's a very feeling-based kind of love, and it is something that God gave us as a gift that can easily be misused. The fact that you have sexual feelings is a gift from God, right? That can be abused badly. But it's a gift. It's not a bad thing. The fact that you have eros, that you're capable of eros, that's the way God made you.
It goes beyond even just sexual. It's emotional.
Very much.
And
feeling.
Again, this is dangerous, so you may have to correct me. But when I think through all the different ways that we use the word love, if I said I love my dogs, if I said I love hamburgers, I love...
Better not be eros.
Well, that's what I'm going with. I'm thinking, what I'm trying to think through is the other words for love.
Which one does it fit? They need a fifth one for that.
I'm saying these other ones are emotional. Yeah. And I thought that maybe this word was more broad than just
it probably fits
sexual.
Better there than anywhere else.
That's where I was going.
Yeah. They need a fifth word.
Yeah. Because I'm not implying anything sexual.
There's a fourth one. There's a fourth word that's really not used in the New Testament except in compound, but I'll tell you what it is in a minute. But you're right. It is a very emotion-driven, okay? It's just that oftentimes eros has a sexual feel, and I don't want you to have that for your hamburger. But the... Philos.
Yeah. Thank you, Toby. Thanks for not making it weird.
Philos, you guys know the term. Everybody knows that Philadelphia is a city of brotherly love. Philos, adelphos. Love, brother. Okay? But brotherly love, that's what philos is about. It's a friendship kind of love. Different than eros, but a very powerful kind of love. Usually friendship is because you're doing something together. You've got common interests, or you've got a common task. So you build this bond, right? Philos is really good in a marriage, okay? It's not agape. If people have philos, it gives them something solid to work from. Eros, pretty easy. Philos is a little bit different. You have some people have eros that have no philos because they really don't have anything in common about what they enjoy, or they don't have tasks that they do together. That's the philos kind of love, right? We are side by side. The agape, well, there's one other that I didn't put up there. It's the word storge, and it's the one that has to do with a mother's love for a child. That doesn't fit anywhere in here. There's something about a family bond, family blood, where you may not feel eros. I hope you don't. You may not even like doing things with them, but you die for them because you're your kid, right? Mamas have this storge when they place that baby on her chest, right in the hospital room. And dads can have it too, but that brotherly bond, that's it, that family bond, that's the storge. The agape is, the best way I put it, it's a God kind of love. It's supernatural. It's different. This one is entirely feeling. This one's somewhere in between. Agape is, I choose your best even above my best. It's a choice kind of love. I'm going to sacrifice you and I'm not going to quit. It's an unconditioned love. It means that even if you're not nice to me, I'm still going to try to do my best for you. That's why God is with you, right? God oftentimes doesn't like you much, I suspect, but at least he doesn't like what you do, but he's still passionate for you. He chooses still for your best. God loves you with an agape love. It's a sacrificial love. It's a unconditional love. It's a choice love. It's a love that I choose you, not because you're worthy, but because it flows out of me. It's not going to stop when you are unworthy because it flows out of me. When you mess up, agape doesn't quit. This is the love that is rock solid in a marriage. Okay? The most profoundly strong of all of these loves. Eros is going to come and go. It's going to. We're made that way. It's linked to your hormones. It's going to rise up and it's going to fall away. And if that's the foundation for your marriage, it's going to collapse. It's going to happen. Right? Philos, it's a good kind of love. It's good to have things in common tasks that you like to do, common interests, that sort of thing. It's a cool kind of love. You don't have to have philos to have a good marriage, right? One of the things that I have discovered is that there are a few things that Julie and I like in common, but most things we don't, right? Most of the stuff Julie likes working with her hands in the dirt. That's ridiculous, okay? The stuff that I like to do, sports, she couldn't care less about. If I have it on, she tries to be nice and not interrupt, but she's not going to sit down and watch the stuff with me. We've been married 50 years. That's philos stuff, okay? We don't have to have we have some common interests. We both love our kids. We have some common interests, but, and sometimes it makes these other things easier if you have some philos. But it's not foundational. This is the one for a Christian. That's what you are commanded. You're not commanded to eros. It's going to happen or not. You're not even commanded as much to philos. You're commanded to agape. Okay? That's the order. Go ahead, Ben.
No, I've already said too much.
Okay. Well, let's move on. Where am I? The next one. This one is interesting. This is where I'm going to start to turn the corner because I'm going to take a side path here in a few minutes. And it's going to sound like it has nothing to do with what we're talking about this evening. But I think it has more to do than you might think. Okay? That's what I'm going to play with. But why would you have to persevere if you chose the right mate? A lot of people think, I'm going to pray and I'm going to pray and I'm going to pray until God points me to the right person. And if I point to the right person, I shouldn't have to have agape. Right? That's nonsense, by the way. It is pure poppycock. Pagans put it a little different way. Soulmate. I'm going to go out and find my soulmate. You know what your soulmate is? It's someone for whom you've got philos. It's someone for whom the eros just flows. It's all this kind of stuff. And it doesn't take that much work to create a good relationship because they're your soulmate. You already see the world through the same lenses. You feel things the same. And if they're your soulmate, why would you have to persevere? Perseverance is only necessary when you don't see things alike. Perseverance assumes tough times. It assumes disagreements. If there were no disagreements, you wouldn't need perseverance. Does that make sense? It only counts in suffering, in pain. Faithfulness, if it's easy, who cares? We're going to look at some scriptures here in a minute, and half of them have to do with persevering in suffering. That's what counts. It's not persevering in good times. Who needs it? Okay? And so this one here, the same basic idea. If God tells you who to marry, then it ought to be easy. If you've got God's person, otherwise you missed it. You missed what God wanted you to do, right? Because if you have a tough marriage, that must not be God's person for you. Because otherwise it wouldn't be so hard. You ever heard that nonsense? Ever felt it? There are theological words for that, but I'm not permitted to speak them in this room, right? It's nonsense. Nonsense. Okay? Soulmate is almost always based on eros and philos. That's it. Nothing to do with agape. And when the suffering comes and when the eros fades, okay, then people wonder whether they made the right choice or whether God made the right choice. It's really interesting, because we have this notion that if it's God's person, if I picked right, it shouldn't be so hard. That's how your kids think. That's how we think.
That's how Disney works.
That's how Disney works.
They
Exactly
tell those
right.
stories all the time, and they're in cartoon form because it's not real. Yeah, it's a fairy tale.
So I'm going to give you an alternative, okay, which some of you are going to hate, and I don't care. You can be wrong. You can still make it to heaven and disagree with me. And
On this.
And I could be wrong too. I know, I understand. But look at the next slide. Can any two Jesus followers build a God-honoring marriage? Okay? Many people would tell you no. Right? Of course, I'm assuming that's a man and a woman if it's going to be God-honoring marriage. Right? And it's going to be easier if you have some philos basis, some things in common. The more different you are, believe it or not, differences attract, but they have a real hard time bonding. Usually the more different they are, the more struggles you can anticipate in their marriage. It's just the way it is. They're very, very similar, then normally they're going to have fewer red flags you're going to have to navigate around. That's just one of those things that you look for when you're doing marriage counseling, right? And so, but it might be simpler. But in my notion, God sets boundaries. God says, if you're a Christian, marry a Christian. I don't think ordinarily God says, if you're a Christian, Ben, marry her. Okay? I don't know, that's almost a blasphemy to a lot of people. They're wrong. They're wrong. God says marry a Christian, and he gives you freedom to choose within that. And then he says, build a good marriage. You don't stumble into it. You don't accident yourself into a good marriage. You don't choose right into a good marriage. You build a good marriage with agape. It's a choice kind of love. Okay? I think I could have married 1,000 different girls and built a good marriage. I chose Julie, and my job is to agape her. And only her, in that sense.
Do you think that we have a hard time comprehending this because of the culture we live in the sense that other cultures, especially in whether you go back in time or even just currently in the idea of an arranged marriage, I think they understand better than us the necessity of building a relationship, whereas we have a perspective of, if I find the right person, it'll be easy.
Yeah.
And so we're looking for the easy relationship, not the marriage that needs to be built.
But to us, if their eros is not there, how could it be right? If the philos is not there, it's probably not smart. Okay? But you're exactly right. Back in the culture of the New Testament, most of the marriages were arranged. You may not even met the person until you married them. Older women teach the younger women how to love. Makes sense, doesn't it? It's not teaching them how to eros. It's not teaching them to love football.
It should have been.
Ricky?
Let me push back just a little bit, so it doesn't get so regimented. I know you're talking about marriage, but I think that my foundation here is that you can't love God and not love His church. Okay, which means to me you can't love God and not be in a. If you love God, then you will have a marriage based on godly principles, godly patterns, and I think
Yes.
what you're describing in many ways is culturally what does a good Christian marriage look like in America? Meaning, what activities occur within a marriage that would make it be perceived as a good marriage? And being someone who's been married to someone for 33 years, we've been together for 40, our marriage looks different today than it did 30 years ago. The activities that occur in my house today, in my good marriage, looks different today than it does then. Just for example, things like sleeping in the same bed. There are many marriages that over time that will occur. You will have separate bedrooms because your husband or wife snores, or because you want to sleep and they struggle sleeping. I mean, it does not mean you have a bad marriage in my mind. There will be times where you will watch different TV shows and you will not be in the same room for hours. That doesn't mean you have a bad marriage. But to me, if Christ is in your home and is in your heart, and you love each other, you worship together, you may pray together, you spend intimate times together, you're passionate about each other. But these other types of love interrupt your daily activity, and that you have time alone from each other. You may even have weekends alone from each other because you're with the guys and she's with the girls. That does not mean you have a bad marriage. I think we have to be very analytical in how we describe activities that occur within a good Christian marriage.
Yeah, I think by and large, I agree with nearly everything you say. The only one I would push back again, and this is one that I understand the point about separate bedrooms, but it always worries me. You better have a daggone good reason. And there are good reasons, but you better have a good one. Because what you want and what your spouse needs may be two different things. And in a marriage, your spouse's needs in agape supersede yours. And oftentimes, that sort of thing is not based on, it's based on what makes me comfortable rather than what my spouse needs. And so you got to be real careful with that one, okay? Because too often, one of the signs of quiet quitting is a cessation of intimacy. And if you can still build intimacy into a relationship, that's perfectly fine, okay? But too often there's a cessation of intimacy, and that is never appropriate in a marriage. Not until the day you die. Now, the intimacy may change in how exactly it's expressed. It may do that, but it needs to be there. One of the partners is probably dying if it's not. So I agree with you as far as the activities. Absolutely, when I'm watching a game, Julie's rarely in the room, and there's nothing wrong with that. We do all kinds of things that are separate. You're right in that as far as you can agape without philos being exactly the same it was when you were younger, or eros being the same when you were younger. It's going to morph over time. But I think that in a healthy relationship, the eros is never entirely gone permanently. It'll go for a time. Philos, I think, is something that you can develop, at least portions of it. It doesn't have to be everything. You don't have to wrap your lives around each other. I think you're 100% right that guys need guy time and girls need girl time, right? And agape is always there. It's always there. What do you think, Ben?
Well, you talk about relationships morphing. Part of the reasons that my marriage has persevered is because my marriage isn't the same as it was 20 years ago. So a lot of that is necessary growth, and so there's going to be those shifts over time. I'm quite open about the fact that my wife married someone she shouldn't have married. He was not nearly responsible enough to be a husband when she decided he was worth marrying. She made a poor choice. But nonetheless, she stuck it out with him and she developed, and I think he's rounded into something decent. I think he's rounded into something decent. Now her husband made a wonderful choice. Like, he nailed it. But nonetheless.
Now, I'm going to take an aside here. Now, this is the place where I'm leaving a kind of, sort of. Okay, I'm going to bring it back. But when we're talking about perseverance, the thing that immediately comes to my mind is Calvinism, right? Because one of the classic teachings of Calvinism is the perseverance of the saints. Eternal security is the way that it's oftentimes put. There's a tulip in Calvinism, total depravity, right? The unconditioned election, limited atonement, the irresistibility of grace, and the perseverance of the saints. And the whole idea is in Calvinism, it's like that previous slide. The previous slide, one before that. When I said previous, I meant two before. I'm just teasing. Calvinism, it's going to be preordained by God. Your spouse, whatever choice you make, has already been determined by God, right? Same thing, it's similar to this, akin to this, that there's a person that is chosen for you. Some Calvinists would say that you can miss that, and if you do that, you stand outside of the will of God, which is an interesting thing. They look for God's choice, and they miss that choice, and so they've chosen the wrong person, and so they struggle for the rest of their life in their marriage, which is poppycock, right? But in any case, the perseverance is something that is basically protected by God because you're following God's plan. Arminianism is very, very strongly free will. God has boundaries. You choose within those boundaries, but I have the freedom to choose within those boundaries. God expects me to choose within those boundaries. I don't have to have God make all of my choices for me. He has given me the ability to make God-honoring choices. Make a choice that honors him, and then make it work. It's different. And these are kind of two different foundations that lead different directions. Perseverance is that if you're destined to persevere, you will persevere because God's going to make sure that it doesn't break up, right? At least in his relationship with you.
And the flip side of that would also be true. If it fails, it was never going to succeed to begin with.
It was never going to succeed in the first place. You don't have the ability to make something succeed that God has preordained to fail. Okay? Which is an awful thought. Okay? There's a cute little thing that I've always been amused with because I've been on both sides of this. When I grew up a Calvinist and I turned into an Arminian, all right? So I've felt both of these personally. Arminians know that they're saved, but they're afraid they can't keep it, right? If there's free will, then I'm scared that someday I might slip out.
And you're talking specifically about perseverance of the saints, eternal salvation, the idea that...
if I've got free choice and I can choose against God too, and in the Bible they seem to talk about people who apostatized, who walked away from the faith. Calvinists would say that they were never saved in the first place. Arminian would say, yeah, they were. They just chose for God, then they chose against God. And God allows us to choose for or against, and that doesn't stop. Okay? And so I'm a Jesus follower, but I still struggle with sin. Do you? Okay? And so you ever wonder if a man has struggled with sin as much as I have for as long as I have, am I really that committed to God? That's the question that a lot of Arminians have. Am I saved because I still struggle so much with sin? Calvinists know they can't lose their salvation, but they're afraid they don't have it, right? I knew when I was a Calvinist that if I was chosen by God, I was in. But how do you know for sure you're chosen? And that's terrifying, because as a young kid, I was a Calvinist, and I wanted to be chosen by God, but I still had this propensity to sin. And I thought, my goodness, if I'm chosen by God, why do I battle it such? Maybe I'm not chosen by God. Okay? And so I lived in terror of God as a Calvinist. And I still live in fear of God as an Arminian. So both of them. Experience both. All right? But here's the reason that this debate is there is because I can go to the Bible and probably convince you that Calvinism is right. And I can go to the Bible and probably convince you that Arminianism is right. Because there are verses that seem to support both sides. Okay? They cannot both be equally true. There are a lot of people who think it's God. Two negatives can be equally true. I don't think so. I think that's silly. Okay? But you can find some verses that would be perseverance, that if you're going to persevere, God's going to make sure it stays that way. This is one of the classic verses, Matthew 10. My sheep hear my voice, I know them, they follow me. I give them eternal life, they will never perish. No one can snatch them out of my hand. My Father who's given them to me is greater than all, and no one can take them out of the Father's hand. Right? And so basically, if you're in, you're in, and you'll never be out. Other verses. I tell you the truth, those who listen to my message and believe in God who sent me have eternal life. They'll never be condemned. They've already passed from death into life. Right? That's Jesus as well. Here's another one from the Apostle Paul. Do not bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. Remember, he has already identified you as his own, and he's guaranteed that you'll be saved on the day of redemption. Okay? And then you can turn around and find other verses.
Well, even some of those you can still argue. Like this one to me is interesting. He's saying, remember, he's identified you, but that comes after a warning. As if
I know.
I can leave it behind. Yeah.
You're right. On the other hand, one of the things that's interesting is if someone tells you, don't quit, don't quit, don't quit, what does that mean? It means you can quit. If the Bible tells you to persevere, it seems to mean that you don't have to. Otherwise, why would they continue to over and over and over and over again say, don't quit, don't quit? The only reason I would tell someone don't quit is because I think they might. And I believe they can. And you've got boatloads of verses in the Bible like this. The nations will hate you because you're my followers, but everyone who endures to the end will be saved. What does that mean? It means that if you don't endure to the end, you won't. Is that fair? Sin will be rampant everywhere. The love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. The one who perseveres will be saved. Seems to me that it's legitimate to look at that and say, if you don't persevere, if your love grows cold, you're out. Is that fair? That's the simplest reading of the text. If you go back to the simplest reading is usually the right one. Right? If you're a philosopher, the old Occam's razor. Okay? Yet he's reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in his physical body. As a result, he has brought you to his own presence. You're holy and blameless as you stand before him without a single fault. But you must continue to believe the truth and stand firmly in it. Don't drift from the assurance you received when you heard the good news. The only reason I think you have a text like that is because people drift. And we see examples in the Bible of people drifting. So God has not preordained that if you're in now, that you will be in at the end. There's a necessity of remaining faithful, of persevering. By the way, that applies to marriage. Okay? A necessity to remain faithful. Once you're in, that's not predetermining the end, even in God's eyes.
That's interesting that you brought that back at that exact moment. Because if you parallel this spiritually, oftentimes when I talk to somebody about baptism, some people think I'm baptized, I'm saved, I'm done. And I will always pull them back to the idea that baptism is the starting line. It's not the finish line. Same as the day you get married. It's not like, oh, my work here's done. I got this covered. No, your wedding day is a starting point. It's not the finish line. Yeah, yeah.
We think of commencement as the end. Commencement just means you're getting started now.
That's fascinating. I've never paid attention to why that's called commencement.
To commence.
Because commence means to start. Doesn't make sense at a graduation.
Isn't that weird?
That is weird.
But it's right.
Dr. Colossians, he's combating false preaching. I mean, that intends, gives you the thought that you can be pulled away from your beliefs at one point. You can be swayed the other direction if you don't stand firm in what you know.
You're exactly right, Ricky. Colossians, Paul is taking on some people who are corrupting those in the church, and he's fighting a heresy. There's all kinds of books written about what the Colossian heresy that was drawing the Christians away, but you're dead on. He's fighting against people who are trying to pull Christians away from Christ, and they're succeeding.
Which is exactly the same as this next one from Hebrews.
Patient endurance. Yeah, I got Hebrews one up for you.
I know, I'm so excited.
You.
I was happy to set it up.
And there's actually about a half a dozen verses in Hebrews where you could have gone.
Yeah, this isn't my favorite one. My favorite's in 6.
Oh, I understand that. I get you. Patient endurance is what you need so that you'll continue to do God's will, and then you'll receive all that he has promised. That's pretty strong, isn't it? It links perseverance with the prize. A failure of perseverance with a failure to achieve the prize. James, blessed is one who perseveres under trial, because that's the key. It's easy to persevere when everything's going great. Perseverance is only counts, it's measured when it's hard. Marriage is too. Faithfulness in a marriage is not when everything is roses. Because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. Having stood the test, which seems to me, logically means that you can fail the test. Right? Otherwise, why write it? Why would I encourage people to persevere if they have no choice but to persevere? Okay? Got anything on that, Ben?
No.
Or Doc, you could study the wrong curriculum in that you could actually be shooting at a target that's false.
Yeah. No, that fits with the Colossians point you're making. The reason I love Hebrews, let me start with this. The reason he doesn't love Hebrews is because it's written to Jewish people and we're not Jewish. The reason I love Hebrews is it's written to people who are tempted to give up on their faith. And I think we're all tempted to give up on our faith. That's the value. And so the whole justification of the book of Hebrews being a valuable resource is the fact that there's a great temptation to quit on what it is that you said you've believed and you're trying to live with your life. And it's easy to walk away. And what people were doing is they were justifying why they're walking away, trying to be right with God, but to get rid of Jesus.
He's
It's
dead on
dangerous.
that.
It's dangerous.
And he's pretty much right on why I don't like it, because the arguments that are used are always based on Old Testament stuff that New Testament Christians don't understand anymore. And so it's a weird one.
So we're both right.
Probably so, I just don't want to admit it.
Hang on. Toby wants to point out how right I am.
Now I have a question.
Oh.
Going back to what you said about drifting, and you said means you can drift.
Yeah.
Don't you think we all drift, whether we're talking about a relationship with God or a relationship with our spouse? There's periods of drifting, and then there's periods of earnestly rowing back to shore.
Yes,
I mean,
you're right.
That's human nature, correct?
We all have a propensity to sin. Drifting is a sin. Do you buy that?
Yes.
Now, I know that sounds harsh, but we're commanded to agape. If agape is there, you're not drifting. And I know that's hard, but we all struggle with it. It is difficult to persevere. Persevering, it's not a simple thing. Now, I don't care if you found your soulmate. It's going to take perseverance to do it right. Right?
I would angle that a little bit different. We're talking about living things. We're talking about a relationship with God, and we're talking about a relationship with our spouse. That's a living organism. And living things are either growing or they're dying. They can't be neutral.
No such thing as status quo.
Yeah. A tree doesn't grow, reach its point, and just stay there without adding any new limbs, any new leaves, and just stays there, but still remains healthy. The second it stops growing, it starts dying. And it's the same with anything. And we're calling that drift because we're not trying to kill our marriage. We're not trying to kill our relationship with God. But what happens is one day you look up and you realize, oh, I have some bad roots. I haven't been feeding this. I haven't been working on actually making this healthy. And so now I have to, you use the term, row back to shore. Now I have to do work to get back to the health that I'd had previously that I got comfortable with and became casual about. And then you look up one day and realize, oh, I didn't mean to. I'm not trying to walk away. But I'm not where I once was.
So it happens. So what do we do besides,
You persevere.
you persevere. You have for 43 years.
Yep.
But
Older women teach the younger women how to do it.
you have those times where it's going to happen because
Yeah.
we're human.
Yeah.
So what's the,
What do you do when you sin?
repent.
All right, let's move on.
You're right. You apologize, you ask for forgiveness,
When
and
we
you work to do better.
I think that also going with what Toby's saying, if you think about
Don't go with Toby.
No, if you think about marriage like actually how you're talking about a tree, if you think about it like seasons, so you're going to go through seasons where it feels like you're dying and you can't do this anymore. That's winter. All right, but then spring comes, and it could be a long season. It could be a short season.
But in the winter, you had better be agapeing.
Well, it's still happening. There's still growth. Winter is important for the relationship. So there's still, the tree is still alive. Sometimes you just need to keep waiting and working.
Well, the working part is big, because the thing is, even though the feeling is not there, which is eros, agape is a choice, and there is never a time in your relationship when you cannot choose agape.
Right.
Okay? And that's the key. There are times when it's much harder than other times. But just because it's hard, that's what perseverance means. That's the next thing I wanted to look at. Perseverance has two components to it, right? Number one, perseverance means that it's going to be tough. Trials, suffering. So many of the verses in the New Testament, and you can find boatloads of them, talk about persevering when stuff is hard, persevering under persecution, persevering in trial, persevering in suffering. You see those kinds of verses all over the New Testament. I just picked one or two, I think just one. We proudly tell God's other churches about your endurance, your perseverance, your faithfulness in persecutions and hardships. Okay? I think this can apply to a marriage too. Perseverance is not quitting during those hard times. Now, some of that is just quantitative. Larry?
Let's talk about the example of a tree and stuff. Christ used a lot of the examples of a grapevine and things like that. But for a healthy crop or a healthy grapevine, they have to prune it. And they have to encourage the new growth in order for it to be healthy. Don't we sometimes have to make changes?
Yes, but just make sure when you're talking about pruning,
Yeah.
allow yourself to be pruned by God. Don't make it your job to prune your spouse.
Well, okay. But I'm just saying there has sometimes.
Pruning is required, but focus on you being pruned rather than her need to be pruned. Yeah, she needs to be pruned too. I know Joyce is really hard to live with. All right, understand that. But the fact is, when you're talking pruning, I'm teasing Joyce. When you talk about pruning, what we tend to focus is, God, if He'd only fix her, this would be easier. All right, that's not agape.
And we talked about that last week with humility.
You did that.
Self-evaluation and self-change.
Yes. You will be pruned by God. Your job is not always to prune your spouse.
Oh, I didn't.
Ladies.
You was playing.
All right? But this is only part of it. Suffering. Here's the other side of perseverance. This is huge. Okay? He'll give eternal life to those who keep on doing good, persevere in doing good. That's the word actually that's used. Who persevering in doing good, seeking after the glory and the honor and the immortality that God offers. In other words, doing good may not bring you any reward from men. It may not bring any reward from a husband or a wife. You keep on doing it because that's rewarded by God. Okay? Perseverance isn't just not quitting, it's continuing to agape. Continuing to do good. Receiving the glory and the honor and the immortality that God offers. But He will pour out His anger and wrath on those who live for themselves, which is the opposite of agape. Right? I'm not living for the betterment of my partner, for the good of my partner, the interest of my partner. It's about me now. That's when agape has died. Right? Who refuse to obey the truth because He's told you to agape. And instead we live lives of wickedness, which means we're self-absorbed rather than selfless with the people that we are called to love. Have I read too much into the text? It's not just about not quitting, it's about what you do in the not quitting. This is huge, which is why you can quiet quit and be unfaithful to your spouse. You're still married, still living in the same house, but you're not faithful to your vows. Okay? Next one. Let's not get tired of doing what's good, because it is flat out easy to get tired of it when it is not reciprocated or when it's not received well. I don't know how many people in church volunteer, but if they don't get enough acknowledgement or praise, they quit because they get tired of doing good, right? It's painful.
Just had an idea. It's not tiring to do what's bad.
No, it's pretty fun. What is it? Groeschel says, if you don't enjoy sin, you're not doing it right.
I just think about that. Like, it's to do the right thing is harder, and it's tiring. To be selfish is not tiring. It's actually life-giving.
But
some
agape
ways.
doesn't quit. And that's how some of the translations put it. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. This is not the word eros, it's not the word philos, it's agape. It's that selfless God kind of love. It doesn't quit. It doesn't quit doing good. It doesn't quit agapeing, which means serving, humble, gentle, selfless, sacrificial, right? Unconditional. It doesn't stop, or else it's not agape. That's the point. And so what we're trying to do is to raise the standard. A Christian marriage isn't just about people who don't divorce. It's how they treat each other in the don't divorce. It's about staying faithful in agape till death do you part. It's not about staying together till death do you part. It's about agapeing till death do you part, even when it's hard. That's the big idea that we try to get across on Sunday, right? I think those are the big ones. Now, Ben wanted me to add one more piece. I put it at the very end so we probably wouldn't get to it. What he wanted me to add is really important. It's really, really good. Because with all of this said, there are times when God says you can quit. Okay? Not agape, but you can quit a relationship. I'm not sure you ever quit the agape, but you can quit a relationship. Right? God gives permission for divorce in some extreme cases. And so one of the things that Ben wanted to talk about is what are the parameters, what are the guidelines for when you can quit a relationship like a marriage, because there are times when you can divorce scripturally, right? People are always looking for loopholes. And those people who are looking for an excuse to get divorce are usually walking a bad path. But there are times when God permits it. And divorce is not the unpardonable sin. I made a very important point on Sunday that it doesn't matter where you have been. What matters to God is who you choose to be right now and in the future. Your past is covered by grace. Your present is what God is looking at right now. The path you choose to walk right now is the one that matters. You may have been unfaithful in the past, whether physically or quiet quitting. You can change because it's a choice kind of love. You can choose agape here on. It's not going to be easy. It's perseverance. That's why it's tested in times of trial, but you can choose that. You got anything on that, Ben?
Were you wanting to run through all this stuff? I know that we're out of time. So
Yeah, we're out of time.
Yeah,
If you want to know when to divorce, go talk to Ben. He'll tell you.
Excellent. I really appreciate that, Doc. That's great. That's our time. So we get to end on that. That's a great moment. Thanks for joining us tonight, guys. We're really glad that you're here. Again, if you do have questions, you want to have some more conversation, you can really absolutely feel free. Come up or shoot us an email, whatever. And
I'd just send you my notes.
yeah, I'll hand them to you. I'm about to throw them away, so if you want to see them, I'll just hand them to you. But let me pray for us. We'll close out. God, I thank you so much for this evening. I thank you for these fine people who've made the effort to be here. God, I pray that you have blessed them. God, I pray that most importantly, that Cap City would have marriages that are blessed. Not because we just want some magic wand to go over us to make things better, not because we believe that there's such a thing as an easy marriage because we found our soulmate, but I pray that our marriages would be blessed because it's made up of people doing the hard work to agape one another. God, that's going to require courage. It's going to require strength. It's going to require some perseverance. So God, give us those things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.